Welcome back to Filling in the History. I believe this is, what is this, episode 5 now? I'm the amateur historian. Welcome back. I hope you are enjoying these little podcasts that I'm doing. Today we're going to be talking about three sections of the Doctrine and Covenants and a lot of the history surrounding that. These were pretty critical moments in the early church history, and especially to the publication of the Book of Mormon. And then so we're going to be talking about Section 3, Section 4, Section 5, as it is in the Latter-day Saint Scripture. And we're going to be skipping Section 10, which actually used to be right after Section 3 anyway. We're going to skip that. And then at the end, because there was such a hullabaloo about gold plates and publication of the Book of Mormon, the last part of this is going to be a little anecdotal again, just kind of stories that we found from I found from the Joseph Smith papers about hiding the golden plates and a lot of the exertions people took to try to find them. Some pretty interesting things. And again, maybe a little bit more anecdotal or opinion based on those. But as far as the first three, some very interesting things that have been found. Quite a lot in the first part, because we're going to be leading up to a couple of negative sections of the Doctrine and Covenants where Joseph Smith, Martin Harris gets chewed out for some of the mistakes that they made and the promises that they broke. So strap in for some papers action. Anyway, so yeah, here we go. So what we're going to be talking about today is what is now known as Section 3 of the Doctrine and Covenants. And for those of you who may not know, Section 1 was a preface. We've done an episode on that. Section 1 was a preface given way into 1830. And that was an intentional thing. As it's stated, the Lord is sort of telling everybody like, hey, we need to have a preface to the Doctrine and Covenants, and so I want you to kind of put this at the beginning. So it's not in chronological order. Section 2, as Latter-day Saints have it, is actually just an excerpt from the Joseph Smith history, from the Pearl of Great Price, or as we like to call it, Draft 2 of the manuscript history of the church. And that one is another alternative translation to the last scripture of Malachi, as was given by the angel Moroni when he came the first time to see Joseph Smith and let him know he's about to do a major project. So this one, Section 3, it just kind of goes downhill. And there's a couple of pretty strenuous things that happen. So a lot of personal things here that I think are important to note. But we're just going to back up to what led us to Section 3. So when we last left off, Martin Harris, who was a huge believer, at that point, he'd given Joseph Smith and Emma $50 because they just got married and they were moving to another home, and he was just trying to help them out with their travel. And at that point, Joseph had just barely gotten the plates. And so Martin Harris knew where they were going, and he would go down, and he got some characters so that he could try to show to his wife, which we'll get into today, his wife and his family, which are interesting people, trying to prove to them and others, which is, I think, a legitimate thing. Like, are these things real? Is this kid just making this stuff up and all this kind of stuff? So he goes to Charles Anthony, goes to a couple of other people and says, can you verify these? And they all do. Charles doesn't really take it too well and tears up his certificate. But anyway, so that's where we are now. So Martin's done that. He's kind of verified in a way because he had other people that sort of helped him verify that the characters were legitimate. And now he's back. And now we're translating. And there's a couple of things that are interesting about this. We're going to get into what is called the Book of Lehi. And where I am pulling that from is actually from the original preface of the Book of Mormon, meaning that this was very widely canonized and put out. So the preface to the Book of Mormon, the 1830 edition of the Book of Mormon, talks about and names this as the Book of Lehi. What we find is in a footnote of Histories Volume 1, that Emma Smith helped with the translation, which I think a lot of people know. Martin Harris helped with a little bit of the translation, which we also know. But there's also Reuben Hale, which is Emma's brother. So there you go. Emma Smith, Reuben Hale, Martin Harris translated part of this Book of Lehi. So Martin says, man, I really want to take these pages that we've done. There was about 116 at that point. So they've done a lot of work. That's a lot of work. And a lot of what I've seen and what I would suspect, and nobody knows, but these pages were also kind of long. If you read from the original manuscript of the Book of Mormon, they had at least in the printed volume, they had to basically show you one half of the page, and then you flip over the page, and the last portion of it is there because the pages were long. So my suspicion is that it was a lot of words. It was a lot of work that they had already done. So Martin comes to him and he says, "Hey, can I take these to show my family, get them off my back a little bit?" And the answer is no twice. So he goes and he asks, and the answer is no. And then he goes again, and he's like, no. And he's like, really, truly, like, can you please ask the Lord? And Joseph is asking through the Urim and Thummim. And so then we get this, which is, again, from Joseph Smith's history. I believe this is part of draft 2. So sometime after Mr. Harris had began to write for me, he began to tease me to give him liberty to carry the writings home and shew them, and desired of me that I would inquire of the Lord through the Urim and Thummim, if he might not do so. I did inquire, and the answer was that he must not. However, he was not satisfied with this answer and desired that I should inquire again. I did so, and the answer was as before. Still he could not be contented, but insisted that I should inquire once more. After much solicitation, I again inquired of the Lord, and permission was granted him to have the writings on certain conditions, which were that he shew them only to his brother, Preserved Harris, great name, his own wife, whose name is Lucy Harris, his father, Nathan Harris, and his mother, Rhoda Lapham Harris, and Mrs. Cobb, which is apparently a sister to his wife. So that's out of draft 2. And then he puts him under a covenant. And in the covenant, it says, in accordance with this last answer, I required of him that he should bind himself in a covenant to me, in the most solemn manner, that he could not do otherwise than had been directed. He did so. He bound himself as I required of him, took the writings, and went his way. Joseph goes his way as well. And what we find here, which is interesting, is apparently, and I'll be quoting this a little later on, but apparently because he had asked and got no's and asked again and got a yes, the Lord actually takes the Urim and Thummim away from Joseph Smith at this point. And it's very parental. I don't know. I have kids, and maybe I'm thinking too much about this, but it's just like, fine. The answer is yes. Now give me the Urim and Thummim back. You're bugging me. So, which is what I would have done. Anyway, so Joseph gets the Urim and Thummim taken away from him. So he kind of stops. It's one of the reasons why he stops. The other reason why he stops is actually quite sad. So draft 2 says this. It says, in the meantime, while Martin Harris was gone with the writings, I went to visit my father's family in Manchester. I continued there for a short season and then returned to my place in Pennsylvania. That's one. Documents Volume 1 from the Joseph Smith Papers, the historical introduction to, again, what we now consider Doctrine and Covenants, Section 3, gives a very different description of what happened there. And it says, with the manuscript in hand, Harris left for New York, apparently on the 14th of June. On the 15th of June, the next day, Emma Smith gave birth to a son who was either stillborn or died shortly after birth. For nearly 3 weeks, Joseph Smith cared for Emma, who, in Lucy Mack Smith's words, felt, quote, to tremble upon the verge of the silent home of her infant. As Emma began to recover in early July, she encouraged Joseph Smith to repair to Palmyra for the purpose of learning the cause of Mr. Harris's absence as well as silence. Shortly after Joseph Smith arrived at his parents' home near Palmyra, he learned that Harris had lost the manuscript. Lucy Mack Smith wrote that, quote, sobs and groans filled the house, with Joseph Smith, quote, weeping and grieving like a tender infant. He and his family soon parted with heavy hearts, and Joseph Smith returned to Pennsylvania. A footnote to this introduction also states that Sophia Lewis reportedly said that she was present at the birth and that the baby was stillborn. Lucy Mack Smith, not present at the birth, wrote that the baby was, quote, very soon snatched from her or Emma's arms and borne aloft to the world of spirits. Although the birth and death of this baby are recorded in Joseph Smith's family Bible under the name of Alvin Smith, this information was recorded in the Bible decades after the event by someone other than Joseph Smith or Emma. The baby's gravestone does not give a name, but reads, an infant son to Joseph and Emma Smith. So if that being true, there are accounts that Joseph Smith was heavily grieving Alvin when he went with his father to go find an old silver mine, which is where he met Emma Hale, and they eventually got married. And there are some stories and some indications that he was sort of, and it sounds bad, I hope not to make it sound bad, but kind of using his marriage to sort of move on from Alvin's death and how much that meant to him. And so the fact that his firstborn son would or could have been named Alvin, and maybe it wasn't, I think is very touching and very tragic. So that's what happens. So right, he's got the Urim and Thummim taken away. He's lost his child, and right after that, he loses the 116 pages. So then what we get is, again, from draft 2. Immediately after my return home, I was walking out a little distance when, behold, the former heavenly messenger appeared and handed to me the Urim and Thummim again, for it had been taken away from me in consequence of my having wearied the Lord and asking for the privilege of letting Martin Harris take the writings which he lost by transgression. So that little nugget. And I inquired of the Lord through them and obtained the following revelation, which is section 3. Which, again, I kind of quote as negative because it is. It's like you lost it. You broke a covenant. You can't be doing this, Joseph. Like, I've taken your privileges away, all this kind of stuff, which is negative. But at the beginning of it, as I was reading it again, this is kind of a personal thing for me. It starts out with like, you know what? The works of God cannot be frustrated. The works of men can, but not the works of God. And so in a sense, there's a bit of a consolation there. And knowing that Joseph had just lost a baby, I think is sort of a merciful thing if we are to believe that this is a revelation from the Lord. So that's what happens. It's kind of, it is to me a little, I hate to kind of insert this here, but like it is to me a little comical that more or less Moroni shows up, says, hey, Joseph, here's the Urim and Thummim. He takes a look, kind of gets chewed out, and then has to hand it back. It's kind of like, here, oh yeah, hang on, he's right here. Here, take the phone. He gets yelled at, hands it back to, hands the phone back to Moroni and leaves. But maybe that's a little too lighthearted. But yeah, that's basically what happens. He gets the interpreters long enough to get section 3, and then he hands them back, and he still does not translate. So the question then arises. This says walking out a little distance. So he's like maybe away from other people and gets this back is the, I don't know, the impression that I get. Maybe somebody else was with him. We don't have any indication of that. So how did we actually get section 3? Who's actually writing this down? And so a little, again, historical intro from the Joseph Smith papers gives us insight. It is not known when or how the text was committed to paper. Although Joseph Smith may have written it himself, he dictated later revelations to scribes and may have dictated this one to either Emma or her brother Reuben Hale, both of whom served as scribes to Joseph Smith during this time. So, I don't know. Did he walk back in the house, receive revelation, leave again? Did it all happen in one place? We don't know. That's the best we could do from the papers. So what are we talking about? We're talking about losing 116 pages. Now, this story is, in my opinion, rather generously shared. Again, it's in the preface of the Book of Mormon. It is technically the first revelation that we have in the Doctrine and Covenants is talking about losing these pages. Section 5 that we have now is about losing the pages. Section 10 is about losing the pages. So they're very, in my opinion, there's a kind of a generous amount about, yes, the pages were lost and, we're getting chewed out about it. Privileges are lost, these kinds of things. Martin Harris is called a wicked man. There's all sorts of stuff. And so, yeah. So what are we talking about here? Well, this story, just to be notable, is not mentioned in the Wentworth letter. It's not mentioned in the Rupp account. Again, the sort of collection of Christian faiths. So the Wentworth and Rupp letters are almost exactly the same, by the way, but just to point that out. Orson Pratt also doesn't point this out in his 30-plus page pamphlet that he puts out there. He has a lot of detail about Moroni and plates, and he kind of skips over the 160 pages being lost in lieu of just kind of describing the story of the Book of Mormon, which, is a good thing to do for when you're proselyting for the church. But Martin Harris breaks the covenant that he made. And then again from draft 2, we get, quote, notwithstanding, however, the great restrictions which he had been laid under, and the solemnity of the covenant which he had made with me, he did shew them to others, and by stratagem they got them away from him. And they never have been recovered or obtained back until this day. And I will echo that. In 2025, to this day, we still don't know where they are. There was I was listening to another podcast, and it was funny because one of the guys was like, it might be in somebody's attic in a shoebox for all we know, which would be like, whoa, like if that ever came out. But anyway, we still don't have them. We have no idea where they went. Never saw them again. The 1832 history, which is, again, Joseph laid his own hand to this one, although not all the words were written by him specifically, but this is from that 1832 history, says this, quote, I commenced translating the characters, and thus the prophecy of Isaiah was fulfilled, which was written in the 29th chapter concerning the book. And this, by the way, a lot of people attach to the Charles Anthony episode when he says, I cannot read a sealed book. Anyway, and it came to pass that after we had translated 116 pages, that he desired to carry them to read to his friends, that peradventure he might convince them of the truth. Therefore I inquired of the Lord, and the Lord said unto me that he must not take them. And I spake unto him, or Martin, the word of the Lord. And he said, inquire again. And I inquired again, and also the third time. And the Lord said unto me, let him go with them, only he shall covenant with me that he would do according to the word of the Lord. Therefore he took them and took his journey unto his friends into Palmyra, Wayne County, and state of New York, and he brake the covenant which he made before the Lord. And the Lord suffered the writings to fall into the hands of wicked men, and Martin was chastened for his transgression, and I also was chastened also for my transgression, for asking the Lord the third time. Wherefore the plates was taken from me by the power of God, and I was not able to obtain them for a season. And it came to pass, after much humility and affliction of soul, I obtained them again. So again, this is a very generalized sense, and they are writing a history, but I would submit that not only the guilt of losing pages and, the death of a child and just all of this stuff, a lot of suffering at this time, pretty severe, pretty intense. So a little bit about the best that I could find anyway. And I'm restricting myself just to the Joseph Smith papers. So I know there's maybe other stories out there, but I'm trying to sort of honor what they did in this series, which is incredible work. But why the nagging? Who is nagging him about this? Well, again, I'm reading. This is 200 years on, and I'm still like kind of nervous about talking about this because you got some catty neighborhood stuff going on in Palmyra right now. Lucy Mack Smith, as I will shortly show you, is not a fan of the other Lucy in this story, who is Lucy Harris. Now, to back it up a little bit, Lucy Harris was born Lucy Harris. She is Martin Harris's first cousin. They get married, and she presents a dowry, which, again, is still a thing, of land. So part of Martin Harris's wealth, he owned over 300 acres of land in Palmyra, and part of that was his, and maybe some of that was inherited. And he also fought in the War of 1812, so I suspect there might have been a pension of land. That's how I know. I'm a son of the American Revolution, and I know that I have a family history that goes back to that. John Thompson specifically was given a pension of land in Virginia, so that's a thing that used to happen. Anyway, but her dowry was well over 100 acres worth of land. And yeah, I'll get back to that in a second. Okay, so let's go back to it. Why the nagging? A little bit about Lucy Mack Smith. This is from, again, just a kind of a historical introduction that we get. And sort of an introduction to Lucy Mack Smith's history. So this is written by editors of the Joseph Smith papers. Quote, Lucy Harris had recently traveled to Harmony to see the plates herself, but left in anger when Joseph Smith would not allow it. Martin and Lucy Harris likely had a troubled marriage prior to the Martin's involvement with Joseph Smith and the translation of the plates. In the spring of 1828, Martin and Lucy finalized a jointure agreement giving Lucy her marital or dower interest. The document by which Martin deeded Lucy's portion of the property to her by way of her brother Peter Harris bears an 1825 date, but was recorded and filed in May of 1828. So just to say, 1825, this is 2 years before Joseph gets the plates. Martin is nowhere near this storyline yet. when they're basically when Lucy is saying, "I want my dowry back. I want my money back," sort of thing. Anyway, since Lucy opposed Martin's involvement in the translation, she may have pressured him into executing this agreement to protect her interests because she feared that he would offer financial support to the translation and printing of the Book of Mormon, which he in fact did. And by the way, this is coming from, you can see this in the Wayne County, New York deed records and some microfilms that they still have. I mean, so they found this. And so, again, to be honest with you, I think this makes a lot of sense. If you're not on board with gold plates and translating a book, and you think part of your money is going to be put towards that, to me, this actually makes some sense. But apparently, they were in process of doing this for years before that. So that really speaks to some serious tension in the marriage. It's basically, in our vernacular, I would call it, and I could be wrong. Lawyers out there, let me know. But this looks like a post-nuptial agreement coming from Lucy, or maybe it was coming from Martin. But anyway, they were not in good shape. And so then she says, "Okay, I want you to execute this because you might use my money," which I think is legit. So, let's give her that much. My favorite, though, is Lucy. This is from Lucy Smith's journal. And this is what I like to call, Lucy is not a fan. So, quote, "Joseph desired me to go, and one afternoon as he wished to see him. But this was an errand that I was somewhat disliked, for his wife was a particular sort of woman that was habitually of a very jealous temperament. And being hard of hearing, she was always suspicious of some secret being in agitation that was designedly kept from her hearing on this account. And I would rather not go up unless I could approach her upon the subject before I spoke to him about it. Joseph Smith consented to this, and I went." So Lucy's like, "Don't make me see that woman. She's just a jealous, bitter." She's like, "What was that? You're talking about me behind my back?" Like, ugh. Anyway, Lucy Mack, not a fan. I keep doing this. Lucy Mack. Lucy Mack Smith is not a fan. So anyway, we're going to leave that one alone. I don't want to get involved in that, even though it's 200 years later. I'm not getting involved in that. We get a little more from, again, the 1830 Book of Mormon preface. I'm going to read just a portion of it, but it says to the reader, "As many false reports have been circulated respecting this or the following work, and also many unlawful measures taken by evil designing persons to destroy me and also the work, I would inform you that I translated by the gift and power of God and caused to be written 116 pages, which I took from the Book of Lehi," there it is, "which was an account abridged from the plates of Lehi by the hand of Mormon, which said account some person or persons have stolen and kept from me, notwithstanding my utmost exertion to recover it again, and being commanded of the Lord that I should not translate the same over again," and so forth and so on. So what you just saw there was the original handwriting that is from the printer's manuscript that we have. And that's where that preface actually came from. So you can actually read the original handwritings, as you just saw in the Joseph Smith papers. It's photographed, and there it is. And it goes on from there. And so if you don't know, again, the pages were lost. They were never translated again. We have no idea what was in them. We have some inclinations that maybe some clarifying stories. For example, that it might have been a Mormon abridgment of the history leading up to it. As we have it now, where the Book of Mormon starts as sort of a first-person account from Nephi's perspective, and basically Moroni doesn't touch first Nephi, as we call it, second Nephi, Jacob, Enos, Jerem, Omni. None of these are touched by an abridger. You just get it straight up. He basically kind of takes the plates and just puts them in. Whereas all the rest of most of this book is either Moroni's writing an abridgment or writing for himself, and so is Mormon and Moroni kind of doing that work. Anyway, little explanation there. So that is section 3. A lot of drama, a lot of history getting into that. We're going to get a little bit more about Lucy Harris later on. She is a significant figure here. But for our next section, we're going to be talking about section 4, which I feel is a very touching section. We're also going to be talking a little bit about patriarchs and church patriarchs and what they are and what they used to be. So stay tuned.